Alright guys, we're back for part 2. We're reloaded and we're going to talk about the cognitive attitudes. Welcome back. So the main book for this one is Beebe's book. I've talked about this a couple times, but I think his biggest contribution to this field of personality type, though he discusses the functions and the temperaments and a lot of other stuff, I think the cognitive attitudes, which are basically the 8 characters that every person has in their brain, that's the idea, is really his biggest contribution, at least in this book. That's my opinion. And we're going to talk about these 8 attitudes, these 8 characters. First, in reference to last video, it's very important to understand that there are 8 functions, 8 tools that every human has, and we have a primary access to 4 of them. That makes up the core of our home base of our personality type. We have eight of those tools. We have 8 characters. Okay, these characters or attitudes and these tools are totally interrelated. The example I like to use is imagining a couple USB flash drives. Okay, that's one of them, and then the other side is the ports in a computer or wherever that you put the flash drive into. Think of the flash drives as being the individual tools. This one's about thinking, this one's about feeling, this one's about, extroverted intuition. And then we have the ports, all with a different color, with different art around them. And when inserted into the port, that function, the introverted thinking, the internal logic person, is going to use this tool in a certain way. So the attitudes or the characters and the tools work off each other. Let's do a brief overview of the attitudes, and then we'll go further. Okay, so there's 8 of them. So the first one is the hero function. This is the apex of someone's personality type. It is where they are most confident. It is where their strongest tool is, their most constant tool, the one that they primarily lean on and use, the one that has tremendous resilience and can kind of it's the first tool that they reach whenever a problem exists, whenever a problem occurs. And for like an INTP, for example, their top tool is introverted thinking. They are extremely logical, extremely good problem solvers, deep thinkers, knowing how to sniff out the validity in an argument, being able to challenge other people's thinking. They are powerful internal logical thinkers. Whereas an ESFP, a very different type than the INTP, their strongest tool is extroverted sensing. Wherever they go, the party follows. They are great, often joyful people, very in the moment. They have a lot of fun. They like to give other people a great experience. They're very just kind of fluid and just vibing. They're all about vibes. They are very good, talented people. By good, I mean good at performing. They're not necessarily good. They're good at performing. They're naturally pretty talented, and they like to give other people a great experience. And each of the 16 types has the strongest tool, this hero, this inner hero that is just powerful and ready to go, ready to take on the world. That's the attitude of the hero, right? It wants the biggest challenge. It wants to prove its own, strength and power. And as we'll talk about in later videos, within how we, as our own type, how we use these functions is going to dictate the unfolding of our character. And this is where some of my beliefs in God and in redemption and in Jesus come into play in how we're going to explore some of the depths of the personality. As you might be able to see right off the bat, the hero function, where we're naturally strongest, it's very, very easy for a person with their hero to develop a sense of pride over, I'm really good at this, and they often are good at that, and I can be self-reliant with this, and I can be this or that. Very difficult for someone's hero function to be used in a humble way. So we'll get to that later, and we'll continue now. So that's the first function, the hero, our inner confidence, our inner boldness, our inner sense of competence. Also, I will say that the hero function can be easy to see in other people. a little bit harder to see in ourselves, because we're so used to using it that we're not really, we don't even consider other tools on our tool belt, really. It's just like, oh, whatever comes up, our mind is like, oh, well, you can use this. And we don't really think twice about it. So we have to develop our own sense of awareness over what function we're using. And it's often going to be the hero. So that's the hero. The second one is a function of restraint, a function of caution, not so much of anxiety, but of restraint, caution, and responsibility. The parent. The parent function is where someone is being careful, but not being fearful. They are more restrained with their use. Unlike the hero, they're more realistic, they're more practical. They're more about practical utility, avoiding the ideals that the hero may have and being more grounded in reality. The ENTJ, for example, they have introverted intuition parent. It's not necessarily as reckless or as unaware of consequences as like an NI child, like an ISTP. They can be very irresponsible with their choice. The ENTJ, especially if they've matured a bit, they use their willpower and their intuition with seeing their goals and their future responsibly, carefully. They want to make sure that they understand the options available to them, and then pick one that makes sense, that has some real practical utility to it, and they know that the cost of that may be high, but they're willing to pay it. The NI heroes, the INJs, the INTJ and the INFJ, with their heroic NI hero, overestimates what they may be able to do, because they see all these great futures for themselves and these individual pathways for them, but they often ignore the effort that it would take to achieve that. The NI parent of the ENTJ and the ENFJ, both have NI parent, are more realistic, are more vigilant with picking their goals more carefully, picking their dreams more carefully, and then when they select those goals, they can be totally unstoppable in the pursuit of them. But it's usually a little more humble, it's usually a little more careful, but it's still very, very powerful. The hero and the parent make up this binary core that is at the tip of everybody's personality. This is the powerhouse combo here. And you can see that there's a natural balancing out as long as both functions are used, with the hero being a little overconfident and the parent being a little too pessimistic perhaps. And together, if they can talk together, they can work out and they can help each function develop. Think of it like a household, maybe more of a traditional nuclear family, where the hero is more like, the big, I can do this dad, and the mom's a little bit more realistic and grounded. Think of like The Incredibles, for example. That's a great example of the hero function, with the dad, and the parent function of the mom. She's embodying the characteristics of a parent function, just as the dad is of the hero. And that interplay will show you what that is like played out in a story. The next function is the child function. The child function is not an adult, but it's not an infant, and somewhere in between, probably younger than a teenager, perhaps, and a little more innocent. There is a kind of inner purity to the child, partly because of their naivety. As children can be naive, we internally have an inner sense of purity and naivety too. The TI child of the IFJs, the ISFJ and the INFJ, they're not really aware of what other people think, and they often assume that people have better intentions than they do, especially when they're younger. The TI child is about logic. It has this purity of thinking where they are not necessarily the most powerful or the most constant thinkers, but they are the purest and simplest thinkers. And simple, I don't mean in a bad way. They can avoid the distractions of too many voices and too much input from other people. And especially when they take time for themselves, they can just sort of piece together solving a problem. They may look for some input and gather some information, and then they can, given enough time and given enough context, they will just sort of innocently work through a problem and come up with a solution. There is an ingenuity with TI child in that it isn't worried about its own glory necessarily, though it can be if it demands that people listen to it. But it has this ability, these types have this ability, the INFJ and ISFJ, to just sort of find a solution. And it's usually something simple and sometimes even obvious, but no one else was able to see that, because it's just like one little thought at a time and working through things and building something slowly, but it's usually perfectly built and a perfectly solved problem that these IFJs are capable of. The SI child for the INTP and the INFP has this innocence of loyalty and giving attentiveness and being there for other people. The SI child just have a way of lasting and enduring through hardship and through difficult times. They can just get through it, and it's not that it's easy for them, but they just have this renewable energy that lasts and it's able to get through hard times. The let's see, who else? The FE child of the ESTP and the ENTP, this selflessly constant giving and just surrounding people with gifts and gifts and gifts, and maybe not always the right gifts, but sometimes the perfect gift. Sometimes the gift that not even the FE hero EFJs would think of. The FE child just always want to make people feel better. It's like a constant source of care. And it may not always be expressed, because the ETPs, the ESTP and the ENTP can look cold and distant with their problem-solving TI parent, but they can also be tremendously giving, even if you don't see it. It's in their heart to just want to help other people no matter what, and they can't help it, and sometimes they hate that they can't help it. So that's the child, a sense of innocence and inner purity. Of course, purity, like in every human being, can start to get tainted and corrupted, but it is one of the functions that has an ability to just keep on giving, even though part of that is a naivety. It's still a renewing force in other people's lives. So that's the child. The next function is the source of our insecurity, sometimes called the inferior. I think it got that name because Jung called the hero function the superior function, and it was naturally balanced out by the opposite of the hero, which is, our inner anxiety, the inferior function. If you think about a family, you have the dad, the hero, the mom parent, the child, and then instead of inferior, think of infant, someone who's really needy, is anxious. How an infant, it gets anxious when its needs are not met, but once its needs are met, then it's a little more peaceful, right? So the infant is our source of insecurity. We are naturally anxious. We naturally believe that we can't do it, especially without certain things, just as an infant needs its food and diaper change and sleep, all that. But it's a little different within our own personality, because we may be older. So even though we have an infant function, maybe it's time for that function to grow up, especially if we're older. But for example, the infant or the inferior function, ISJs, the ISTJs and ISFJs, have this dual fear of being terrified of the future. They catastrophize things. They see the worst possible outcomes, and that's mostly all they see. It's very hard for them to be excited or to be optimistic about what good possibilities there are for other people. And on the other side of that, they are also afraid of being undesirable, of being unwanted, a fear of other people not pursuing them, and a fear of just not being wanted, not being thought of, not being considered by other people. So catastrophizing plus not being wanted, that's the fear, that's the insecurity, that's the very needy side of the ISJs, the ISTJ and the ISFJ. Likewise, the ESFP and the ESFP and the ESTP, both artisans, their inferior is about their own freedom. They are heroic with being naturally great performers and getting attention from other people, making other people comfortable, helping other people meet their needs. But they are very afraid of their own future. They don't know what to choose. They're very aware of the moment. They are scared of choosing something for their own future. To choose one thing means saying no to 1,000 other things. And who are they to say that 900 of those 1,000 other things were not better, were not much better than the one choice that they made. They are terrified and often and paralyzed and fearful of making a choice. And that leads them often to not make any choice or just let their impulsiveness guide them, which obviously doesn't get them anywhere good. So they are naturally afraid of making a choice. The TI inferiors, infants of the ESFJ and the ESFJ and the ENFJ is afraid of being dumb, is afraid of not being able to think things through, is afraid of not being able to contribute valuable thoughts to other people, and is afraid of those thoughts not being received by other people. So they obsess over not being smart and not being good thinkers, even though they can go the opposite way and demand people listen to them because it's their insecurity. It's a natural insecurity. So that's the infant. The infant is very needy. It needs a lot. But as we'll talk about later, when the infant can grow up a little bit in someone's maturity, in someone's personality, it can accomplish tremendous things. Okay, so those are the four main attitudes of a personality type. I'm going to briefly go through the next four. These next four are a little bit below the threshold of our consciousness to some extent. I don't want to go too far into that now, but I'll go over them briefly. The Nemesis function is the antagonist of the hero. It exists to challenge the hero. If an NI hero, the INJs, really want something and is very wanty, the Nemesis is like, well, have you considered the different ways this might go wrong? The Nemesis is a little bit like the Inferior in that it has a sense of worry or anxiety, but it's more about not, the infant is like, I can't do it. The Nemesis is like, well, have you considered this? Or have you considered that? Or maybe this person is up to something that they shouldn't be. The Nemesis is existing to pull the hero into taking a broader look into things and being a little slower, a little more careful, almost a little more parental in order before they proceed. So the Nemesis exists to balance out the hero. The next function, the sixth one, is the Critic. The Critic is a very unique and very important function. Probably the most important function in these bottom four to know for someone else. The Critic is where we are like an old grumpy person, just looking at the world and talking about the old days being so good, and these days being all the young kids running around with hats and tattoos and whatever else. That's kind of the Critic's attitude. It has a senileness. I think Beebe called it the Senex actually, which is I think a label that's hard to wrap to understand the meaning of intuitively, but I think he was onto something with that too. So if you prefer what the Senex, if that resonates more with you, that's a valid way of interpreting the Critic. But the Critic is either really critical of one's own, something in one's own inner world, like the INTJ and ISTJ are very critical of their own thinking. They are very critical that they haven't done the research to justify having an opinion. They're like, well, you haven't thought through that carefully enough, or you haven't considered that. And it's really can be like a torturous inner battle of the Critic just badgering the ITJ's own thinking. Whereas the ENJs, the ENTJ and the ENFJ are more critical of other people's choices. They are responsible, usually, with their choices, and they look at other people just sort of recklessly, impulsively making choices, and they are critical of those people and often dismiss them ahead of time. Now, of course, we're all hypocrites, and ENJs, while they can make responsible decisions, can also swing the entire other way, where they become insanely impulsive for short periods of time. So the Critic is, whatever function is in the Critic, it looks at that with jaded eyes. TE Critic, ESTPs and ENTPs can have a really hard time listening to other people. They can be insanely dismissive and not take the time to actually consider what someone says. I've had some interactions with ENTPs where they're not really listening to me. They don't really want to understand. They are just searching for ways to tell me that I'm wrong instead of trying to understand. Now, I've also had experiences with other ENTPs, or those same ENTPs, where they are calm and careful and balance out pushing back against something and then letting something else in. And they can be very warm with their critic. Maybe warm isn't the right word. Very wise and careful with the critic, or very dismissive. And for every type, that's kind of the binary that's in play. Are you going to be jaded and dismissive and bitter, or are you going to be a wiser sage? That binary, that story that is in your own mind, is an opportunity for you to either help renew the world with the critic function, or further, let it go into bitterness and acid, basically. So the critic is a very, very hard function to master, and I don't recommend you try doing it alone. So the next two functions are the functions that we have the least awareness of. Our seventh function, the trickster function, it's oblivious. It doesn't really, it's like a very fuzzy TV screen. It's like, I can't quite see the picture. I know there's maybe something there, but I can't see it. That is the trickster. TE tricksters with INFJs and ISFJs, they are not aware of what other people think. They know that what other people may think is like, it could be anything. And they tend to struggle with like tax forms and procedural forms. They don't really understand the structure of those kinds of things. Systematic things, Excel sheets, those are kind of TE tricksters' nightmares. Though I have met some ISFJs who like that stuff, and I still haven't figured out why, to be honest. But the trickster function is a natural sense. It's a natural blind spot for us. And the reason it's a trickster is because right when we think we almost have it, it like is pulled away, and then we realize we were never really close to it. So we'll go into that a little bit later. I don't want to go too much into the trickster now. It's a little bit complex, but just know that it's our source of obliviousness and kind of like thinking we understand and then not understanding, and then that's kind of a cycle that repeats itself for a while. The bottom function, this is kind of a dark function. This is a function that has the most risk to it and then the most reward to it. It's been called the demon function. I don't love that because the connotation of a demon is kind of distracting. I think Beebe called it the Underminer, which I like that because it has a direct application to the other functions. I'm fine with either one. If you hear me use the demon, I hope you can hear that in a more of a technical way, that it has, it's something that acts like it has bad intentions and can be undermining to the personality itself, but is not necessarily a bad thing. And again, I don't want to talk too much about this because it's kind of loaded and I need more time to go into it to do it justice, but just realize that it's an underminer. For example, and so it's an underminer and it's not very conscious in someone's mind. We talked about the EFJs a minute ago, the ESFJ and the ENFJ, how they're worried about other people not listening to them. The TE demon, or the TE underminer, which is attached to the TI infant, EFJs are often pretty bad, not always, but they can be pretty bad at listening to other people. And the more they are anxious about other people listening to them, it's likely that the more they are not listening to other people. The level of anxiety we have with our infant function is correlated like in a very mathematical way to how much damage the underminer function or the demon function is doing. With ESPs, we talked about them being worried about making choices or making the wrong choice. When they make the wrong choice, or when it's more like when they rely on being impulsive and doing what feels good and doing what makes other people have a good experience, they have extroverted intuition demon, where they unknowingly kind of can ruin situations for other people, ruin futures for other people. It's like, if I don't have a choice, if I don't feel free, then you guys don't get to be free. It's not necessarily conscious. I know that sounds really malicious. It's easier to express it in a way that is like villainous, but the underminer is oftentimes not intentionally, we're not aware of it always. And one of the most important things to understand in this psychology is how to become more aware of that natural thing that undermines us. Now, in a grand scheme of things, why is the Underminer undermining us? And it's because there's a natural pulley system in physics, in the world, of the thing that is raised to the highest has something equivalent that's being pushed down. And that pressure helps keep something up and helps keep that down. The Underminer is the thing that's being pushed all the way down so that our hero function has the power and the ability that it has. And until we have the humility and the grace, which again, I do not recommend you trying to do that alone, until we have those qualities, and in my opinion, really a deeper transformation, deeper spiritual transformation, then the axis of the demon function is really dangerous, and but it still needs to be integrated. Some of that pressure needs to be taken off so that we can move between different states of mind, different states of being, and have an inner renewed psyche, basically. So anyway, that's enough about the Underminer. Those are the 8 functions: the hero or the superior function, where we're confident; the parent, where we're responsible and careful; the child, where we're kind of innocent and pure, though sometimes a little bit entitled; the infant, where we're naturally anxious and fearful, but we can become extremely courageous at the right time; the nemesis, which pulls against the hero function and says, you know, have you considered that? I don't think so. It kind of incites a little bit of fear like the infant does, but it does it for a different purpose. The critic, where we're a little bit jaded, where we look at the world like we're an old grandpa or grandma who's just really irritated about how our lives went. And then the trickster, where we're oblivious, but we don't think we're oblivious, but we are. And then the demon or the Underminer, where we're really unaware of why damage is happening when we do some things. So those are the 8, and that concludes our talks on the functions and the attitudes. And in the next video, we're going to get right into the individual functions. So I hope to see you there. Thanks for stopping by.